So my phone has run out of batteries and I'm relying on sand, which is what it's going to be like when the oil runs out, everybody. So on Sunday I was doing the paper review on Andrew Marr, and they're very weird things, paper reviews, because obviously broadcasters are completely neutral and papers are completely not neutral, and on broadcast journalism you have to pretend to be neutral while nevertheless representing your point of view as fervently as you possibly can to the person opposite you who is not neutral either. And you have to keep this really, really neutral tone of voice for the whole thing. And it's really, I must say, it's really, really difficult. So even though I cannot walk, hike, parry, or do any of the other of those three verbs, I'm really good at pretending not to be biased when I actually am. And I think that is a human skill, man. So anyway, there I am with Fraser Nelson, and we're talking about Steve Hilton. Does everybody remember Steve Hilton? He's the guy who was Cameron's kind of brain half. I don't know who his brawn half was, but his brain half in 2010. And I really had a beef with him at that time because he was anti-maternity leave, he was anti the welfare state, he was anti basically everything that I think of as important, and he was really loudly anti it, like that wasn't a bad thing. He's brought a book out, and we were discussing the book. The book was in the Sunday Times. There's me and Fraser Nelson, whose accent I'm going to attempt to do. It's actually just a posh accent, but it's got a kind of hint of Scottish, so that makes it interesting. And I was reading the extracts in the Sunday Times, and I said, this could be written by any given lefty. And Fraser was like, no, it couldn't, Zoe. No, it couldn't. No, I think you'll find it couldn't. And I said, well, it really could. If you look at his targets, it's kind of corporate influence over policies, overweening corporations over kind of everyday aspects of life. You know, it's the kind of elitism of the political class. It's everything. It's everything any of us would have written. It's everything I did write. It's everything that anybody in, you know, to the left of the Labour Party would have written. And he said, no, you've got it completely wrong. And I said, I don't think I have. I actually don't think I have. And he said, well, I think you'll find his prescriptions are very different. And I looked at the prescriptions, and they were like, well, why don't you all, you know, AN other reader, get involved in politics, and maybe then things would be better. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much a left-wing point of view as well, you know, participation. And he said, no, the prescriptions are completely different. And I thought, actually, the difference will be that he has some prescriptions, whereas on the left, we're like, basically the right is having a party, and we're complaining about the noise. And we don't have any noise of our own, and that's part of the problem. So it kind of dawned on me that you know, we are uniquely bad at kind of prescribing. Whenever there's a crisis, the right is really, really good at having a kind of 10 different answers, and the left is really, really, really good at complaining about them. And there must be some kind of way of revivifying the kind of left that used to say, we've got an idea that might make things better. You know, we actually could improve things. We wouldn't have to just accept life as it is and protect you from it, which I think was the problem with the Labour Party. We could actually build something that was a little bit better. Whenever you say, you know, whenever you're kind of with like-minded lefty thinkers and you say, okay, we could actually do something a bit differently, you always get three main objections to what you're saying. One of them is the kind of non-lefty mulch idea, where, you know, in this room, we all think these things, but everybody else is a complete idiot. And this is like completely widespread in every kind of moaning, red wine-driven, left-wing conversation that has ever taken place. There's always somebody going, you know, you think that about student fees, you think that about free tertiary education being about investment in your people, and your people being the wealth of the nation, and everybody bearing that cost to the service of the nation. And I think that too. But everybody else, they just think that's going to cost a load of money, and that's going to cost me more tax. You might think this about regenerating energy so that people own it, so that it's sustainable, so that it's green, so that it's renewable. Everybody else just thinks, how much is it going to cost? And I always say, I don't think other people do think that. I don't think that is how everybody else thinks. And they always say, that's because you don't work in an office. And I say, okay, that is actually true. And then the second big objection is the kind of catastrophizing and kind of channeling my mother from 30 years of left-wing politics, the love affair with catastrophe. The left loves catastrophe so much, it's almost unbearable to watch. So if you say, we actually could do something about climate change, they're like, no, 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 we're already on course for 2 degrees. What's the point? Everything's already sunk. When you say, we actually could afford to do this thing, they're like, no, 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 the money's already been spent by the bankers. Everything is a complete catastrophe. And, you know, couldn't possibly be done any different way. And then the third big thing that the left always does is when you say, if you finally persuade them, or else you shout at them so much that they just give in, then they say, well, who's going to be the leader of that? And you say, well, it's not really about a leader, right? It's not really about waiting for the guy who knows everything, even if that guy is a woman. It's not really about waiting until the party exists for you to vote for. It's not really, none of these things are really about waiting. You have to do it together if you're going to do it, and then the leader emerges out of that. And that is like a massive, massive kind of hurdle to the left in a way that the right doesn't really care about, because, you know, they will get the ideas together, they will get the movement together, and then they'll say, okay, you want Cameron? Fine, Cameron will do. Okay, he used to be the press officer for Carlton TV, and all he's ever done is send out videos, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. The leader doesn't matter, the movement matters. And the left, ironically, considering it's meant to be the kind of movement of participation, really hates doing anything until they can find the leader. And until they can find that person who unites every quality that they've ever cared about, they really are incapable of moving forward. So then you start to think, well, on those terms, if you look at English politics, then yeah, they're completely right. We really are screwed. Everybody is a mulch of unthinking, tax break wanting, antisocial people, and everything is a catastrophe, and really in a catastrophic situation like this, we don't deserve to be in charge. And even if we were in charge, it would be really bad because we don't have a leader. And this is when, you know, you start to look kind of elsewhere for models of left-wing activism. Now, this is another thing the left does. As soon as you say, oh, well, Podemos look like they're doing really well, somebody sends you a link to an anthropologist that finds Podemos is actually not doing very well, and they look like they're 25 in the polls and they're going to be the party of government, even though they were only established a year ago. But if you really drill into the figures, they don't have brilliant support in the southeast of Spain. And then you say, well, you know, it looks like Syriza scored quite a major victory. And they say, okay, well, if you really drill into it, then nobody really, that was just a kind of desperate nationalistic, you know, expression of frustration. It doesn't really mean anything politically. And then when you say, well, it's interesting, isn't it, that the SNP is actually kind of now the kind of voice of the progressive left in the whole of the United Kingdom, and they're like, no, 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 those Scottish people just hate us. Don't you remember? That was the whole point. So then when you actually look at parties that have successfully built a left-wing movement out of apparently nothing, the things you notice are as follows. The leader of Podemos said, Pablo Iglesias said a year and a half ago, your movement starts to work when the things you're saying make sense to people living their lives. And that went round this kind of left-wing internet group, and we all laughed like, ha, who's that? When's that ever going to happen? Come on, we're doing left-wing politics here. When's that going to make sense to people's actual lives? But in fact, Pablo Iglesias was right, because as soon as what he was saying did make sense to people who were living in Spain and having their houses repossessed and seeing a kind of very corrupt politics in which the left and the right were indistinguishable, they did gather really, really fast around a new party. And it was a year. It was a year from the setup of the party to the majority in the polls. It didn't take any time at all. When you look at the SNP, it was, and everybody says, oh, well, you know, they used to be the tartan Tories, they weren't, they're not progressive, it's just an act in order to get votes so that they can go back to being the tartan Tories, just properly tartan this time. the surge in the SNP membership has come from grassroots left-wing groups in Scotland, and it's taken the country. And that, again, was a year and a half. It's the fastest takeover in the history of left-wing politics, in fact. And then when you look at Syriza, all the stories a year ago when they actually set up were about Golden Dawn. They were all about kind of fascists, and that's because fascists are much, much sexier to write stories about. There's nothing more boring to write a story about than a left-wing person who wants to help people. It's just appalling, with their do-gooding and their optimism and their lack of conflict. They never punch anybody on TV. They never beat up immigrants. They never get together in black shirts. There's no resonance of the war. There's just nothing. There's just nothing to work with. So all the stories were about the Golden Dawn, and yet it was Syriza that actually took the election. And that kind of happened completely separate to both the Greek media and the international media. And what it shows, I think, first of all, is that these things turn on a sixpence. They turn so fast that you can't really see them happening until they've happened. And then once they've happened, you think, obviously that was going to happen. So Podemos basically just rendered irrelevant the left-wing party in Spain. They didn't kind of try and take them on. They didn't try and treat with them. They didn't try and draw their supporters in. It's very like what Henri Bergson said about the Protestants taking over the Catholics. They didn't try and preach to them. They just had so much internal vitality in their own movement that people went with them anyway. And that is what happened, certainly in Spain, that there was never any attempt to kind of co-opt an existing left-wing space. They just created a new left-wing space, and before they knew it, it had as good as you could call most people who supported a political party in favor of it. What Syriza did was basically extinguish the left-wing party. So they PASOK'd the PASOKs. They just drove them out of town. And that was, I think, quite sad for a lot of Greek people to see this party that had been really, an important political force, if not in action, certainly in rhetoric, reduced to 4% in 2 months. But that's kind of the PASOK model. And then the SNP model is the same. They basically took on Labour and extinguished it, exterminated it. And then you have to think, well, are these movements as slow as we think they are? Because what we're always told is that you have to wait until you see a party emerging, that it takes decades to emerge, that it kind of wriggles out of its cocoon, that you can see every stage. You can see the caterpillar stage. I can't remember the life cycle of the butterfly. It's really annoying because I did it for my kids' homework quite recently. But you can see the kind of thinking, the academic political thinking is that you see these movements really from their incipience, and you can track them as they grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when they can finally burst out flying, that was completely obvious to everybody. But actually, that's the opposite of the way it works. The real way it works is that you see a load of butterflies around, and you just have to imagine that those were caterpillars some indeterminate time that I can't remember previously. And that, I think, is what we're looking at on the English left. People keep talking about the SNP as like a kind of determined anti-union force. They're not anti-unionist, they just don't want a union with us. And if we actually had a movement that echoed them, if we had a movement that echoed their sentiments and said, well, we don't want endless austerity either, well, we don't want endless warmongering at the expense of our people either, well, we don't want to constantly be shrinking the state so that we can all just be poorer either, then we too would have something that they would want a union with. I don't really see them seriously as a kind of separatist party. I see them as a people just waiting for us to be a bit more cool. And actually, in fairness to them, that is what they say when they come down. They say, the problem with you guys is you all seem so depressed. You all seem like you've lost before you've even begun. You all seem like, oh, it's the right-wing media, as though there's nothing you can do about that. You all say, oh, well, the politicians aren't interested in making change, as though there's nothing you can do without politics, without kind of mainstream Westminster politics. You all act as though you're completely defeated, before you've even tried to make anything. Then you think, well, how would you try and make anything outside of normal politics? And this is like a really pressing question now, right? Because we've got a new government and it's not going anywhere. So if you don't think that within the government there's the change that you want to make, there's the possibility of that change, then you've got to figure out kind of ways around it and ways to mobilize and ways to gather people who think the same thing under a banner that is different to a kind of traditional political party. And that, I think, is where all these kind of exemplars fall down, because we do not have a referendum on whether we should split up with Scotland, even though that would be amusing. We do not have the Spanish housing crisis, which, well, we don't have it yet. We might have it one day. Oh, I've run out of time. And we do not have the Greek debt crisis, even though the Conservatives constantly try and persuade us that we do. So really what we want to do is not find a leader or find a party, but find a way to mobilize around a thing that we care about. And that's what's going to make the difference. Thank you.